Welcome to the Climate Champions. I'm here with Congressperson Mike Levin, representing California's 49th Congressional District, which is just a few miles from where I lived for over 24 years, just a few years ago. And he's been on the show before, a couple of years ago, but I've changed formats with this show. Instead of just talking about a climate champion, I'm going to dig into specific issues. And so, Mike, I'm excited to have you on the show to talk about something very important, and that is utility rates.
Well, it's great to be back, Lee. Thank you for having me, and thank you for all the good work you're doing.
Well, I wish I was doing better work. To tell you the truth, I feel like to some extent we're losing the battle here on renewable energy. There's a lot of difficulties for wind, difficulties for solar. I would love it if I was doing a little bit of a better job here.
Well, no. Give yourself more credit than that. I think we've got a very unreasonable president, for whatever reason, has a grudge against wind turbines and solar panels. It doesn't really make much sense. My understanding is his dislike for wind goes back to some wind turbines that were built near his golf course in Scotland many years ago. So, I wake up every morning, Lee, and I say I want to be able to focus on those things over which I actually have some control. I can't control what's in Donald Trump's head, but what I can do is begin to chart the path forward to try to reverse some of the damage that they're causing and some of the chaos they're creating, and continue to engage and know that these things are cyclical. Our political system is designed so that voters get a voice every couple years, and I think that's very critical in this time, that people exercise their democratic voices and stand up for not only for a cleaner environment, but really for lower energy bills. That's the other thing here. It's a total self-own when this president or this administration says they want to cut your electricity bills, as they did during the campaign. As you might remember, they said, in fact, the president said, I'm going to cut your electricity bill in half. And instead, the opposite has happened, where the bills went up roughly 13% in 2025. They continue to go up now because of Iran. And it's really a mess. It's a mess. So just stay with it. And I know that we've both been at this a very long time, Lee, so we can get through the next couple hundred days and then, the next few years as we chart a course for a better future.
You are sponsoring an Energy Bills Relief Act. Is that correct?
Yes.
And can you tell us about that?
Absolutely. So it was very apparent that we could spend the entire next year just being reflexively opposed to the energy policies of this administration. And that would keep us pretty busy, because there's a lot of bad stuff that they've done with regard to energy and environmental policy. However, I think it's very important that we not just be reflexively against, but that we actually stand for something. And so the Energy Bills Relief Act, EBRA or EBRA, depending on your preference for how you want to.
You got to choose. It's your bill, man.
Well, some say EBRA, some say EBRA. I think it's like tomato, Lee. We'll figure it out. What it tries to be is that proactive agenda to lower your electricity bills, to put consumers first, because what we've seen over the past year is that power prices have increased roughly twice the rate of inflation. During that, we've seen all these data centers that are now proliferating, and really the ratepayer is on the hook for a lot of that. And I think that's wrong as well. We saw the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the tax credits go away for things like solar and wind and electric cars. And we're trying to tackle all of this in a few key ways. We're trying to deploy the clean and affordable energy that we're going to need that'll actually reduce people's bills. We're trying to put affordability at the front of all of this. I think there's been so much discussion and polling and analysis suggesting that that's the strongest card that we have, is bringing costs down for people. And then we need to modernize the electric grid to make all of this a reality. So that's what our bill is really designed to do. I'm very proud of the fact, Lee, that we have 122 co-sponsors and counting. We're trying to get that number to 150 as quick as we can, and we're hopeful that we can continue to build that coalition in the coming months.
I'm really excited about everything you're doing, but I'm going to ask some tough questions.
Please.
I am facilitating, just yesterday, I facilitated a meeting between 40 utilities across the country, large and small, PNNL, and the Department of Energy. And it was to get at how utilities are dealing with data centers. And when rates came up, I kept asking, Are you seeing this increasing rates? Are you seeing that happening? And the utilities on the call, the ones that spoke up, said they're not, because they are putting in rules around putting in that energy for those data centers that would make it difficult to have that be a stranded asset on other ratepayers. They wanted them to put up bonds, guarantee and sign what offtake they would pay for. Even if they didn't take it, they were going to have to pay for it. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, I think that there's a lot of backlash right now over some of the early experiences that people have had. I'm thinking about states like Virginia, where this has become a very hot topic, where I think we're at an inflection point where the utilities recognize that they're not going to be able to continue to just stick it to the ratepayer. And I'm glad if they're going through their utility rate setting process and they're trying to be fair with ratepayers. Well, you have these trillion-dollar tech companies that are reaping the reward of all this build out. You can't stick it to the small business owner or the average person. And I think that it's one thing for that to be done at the rate setting level, but I don't think that's good enough, Lee. I think that it's great to hear that from the utilities, but I want to make sure that they can't do it, even if they wanted to, that we set it in law that those companies that are benefiting from those data centers should be the ones who are footing a reasonable cost. Well, rates are already too high. They should not be made even higher by this proliferation of data centers. And moreover, I'd like to create incentives, not just, rules, but incentives for these data center operators to use renewables and to use clean energy and to use energy efficiency. We should be doing all we can to make that a reality. So I look at it similarly to the president's pledge. He got Microsoft to do a pledge. And I'm not picking on Microsoft. I use Microsoft products every day. I use them this morning. I'll use them today many times and have my entire adult life. And I like Microsoft products. Not picking on them at all. I use all these tech companies' products. Again, I'm not trying to make them the bad guy. What I am saying is they need to foot their fair share of what they are benefiting from. Microsoft going to the White House and the president saying, we want to pledge, that's great. But that pledge can't be an excuse for inaction by Congress. Congress has to actually make this the law of the land so that it's not just a nice thing, but it's the law that they cannot stick it to the ratepayer, even if they so choose.
We had Dominion on that call from Virginia, and they talked about that growth. And they're the ones, the person representing Dominion, really talked about the rules they have, which were so good that other utilities were saying, hey, we really need to learn about that because we are struggling. So I think it is a very valuable effort for Congress to take an action, because that would have ratepayers be more comfortable that this was being acted upon, and it wouldn't be up to the utility. Most utilities want to do the right thing here, but having guide rails, because again, Dominion knew what they wanted to do to protect their ratepayers, but the other utilities did not. So I think having that spelled out is extremely helpful.
Well, I've tried to follow, state by state, Lee, and, PJM, we had big rate increases there. The Ohio folks, I think they set 85% as what they wanted the data center folks to have to pay. The data centers wanted less. I think clear rules of the road are important. I think that's one aspect of this. It's one of many things we have to do to lower bills.
Yeah, when times get tough, people change how they operate and where they put the bills on. Not just utilities, anybody shifts how they get their money back. So having it codified seems very important.
I agree with you. I think, again, great that they're voluntarily engaging. I think they see the writing on the wall, but we need this to have teeth, and we need it to be the case not just in the boom times for data centers, but maybe the leaner times that may come.
So I'm extremely excited that you're trying to get renewables back in the forefront with the tax credits. I think that's extremely important to the industry. One thing I'd like you to talk about, if you're willing, one thing I didn't like about the tax credits before is that many of the companies that invested a lot of money in renewables ran out of tax they had to pay. And so they had to find other companies and give them a lot of the profit, even though they weren't taking the risk, in order to find companies that could take the tax credit and make use of them. So are you addressing that at all?
Well, tax equity financing has been a thing for as long as I can remember. I think what we're trying to get at with this bill is trying to just end the lack of predictability and stability. My take is every 2 years you have this pendulum swing back and forth. Are the credits there? Are they not? Are they long-term and predictable? Are they not? I err on the side of let's give people a decade. Let's give our industry leaders in renewables a decade and a runway of credits to do the projects that they have in the queue and to make sure their pipeline of projects continues to be robust. I think that it's one key, and getting away from the wild swings is really important. And I don't know how you do that necessarily, because a lot of it is based on reconciliation policy and who's in charge. So we put the credits in via the IRA. They took the credits out via the one big, not so beautiful bill. I've thought about this a lot. The other school of thought that there are some in industry that say is just take the credits away and don't worry about that. Don't make that a focus of policy. Focus instead on permitting reform and things like that. And I think that's important too. But I'm willing to give up tax credits if the fossil fuel industry gives up its favored tax policy. But I don't think we should unilaterally kneecap renewables at the expense of an entire growing industry to give the handout instead to the fossil fuel industry. I've actually done legislation to end all of the fossil fuel subsidies. And if that were on the table, end all of it, it would certainly bring in more revenue for the federal government and help us balance the books. But, in the absence of that, I want to, make sure that we're keeping renewables in the game. When I talk to some executives, entrepreneurs, and so forth, they tell me that the issue is not technology, the issue is not capital, the issue is permitting. It's actually building the stuff, which is where we've got reform in this bill to make it easier to build those multi-state, multi-gigawatt transmission projects that have been stuck in the queue. We've had them in California where it can take 10, 15 years or more to get these projects done. So our California ISO will agree that we need this project or that project. By the time the project's ready, we've already found the power elsewhere. And, the one example, I think Trans-West Express took 17 years. That's really dumb. And we need new rules of the road to make it easier for those multi-state projects. And we need FERC to take a more active role.
Agreed. When I worked for the utility, there were a lot of pressures to spend more money. Because the more money you spent in capital, the more money that you made. I wouldn't say that the money was spent stupidly, but there were projects that maybe could save money that didn't rank as high as other projects that maybe were dealing with reliability issues 5 or 10 years out. Because reliability and safety were so far above projects that could save money. So how do we lower bills?
Well, unfortunately, you can't do either or. You need safety, reliability projects, and you need projects that are going to reduce costs in the long run. One other piece of the EBRA, EBRA. One other piece of it is a grant program, a federal grant program to help offset expenses related to wildfire hardening of grid resources. So, one assessment that I've seen, particularly for California, when you sort of unpack why our bills have gone up the way they have in California, it's because they're rate basing a lot of those grid hardening activities or expenses. We live in a new normal where we have a year-round wildfire season. We have a grid that's getting older. SCG&E has done, I think, an amazing job of investing a huge amount of money. And I've been to their wildfire data and analysis hub there in Claremont, and it's quite impressive how they've, installed cameras everywhere, and they've done all the right stuff.
Yeah, they would be, when I worked there at least, the third largest weather station company in the world as a utility just based in the San Diego area.
Well, it's extraordinary. And then when you compare and contrast, and I'm not here to pick on the others, but it's a pretty dramatic contrast. And, I always am frustrated that the other two did not invest in a similar manner as early or as often. Because at least I know in our community, and I'm an SDG&E customer, I don't send them as much money because I have solar on the roof, but we still send them some money. I know that they're on top of it whenever there are threatened wildfires because they have the alert camera system everywhere. They have really, really smart data and analysis that is keeping track of everything. And that, as a homeowner, that makes me feel good because I hope that the insurance costs are somewhat reflective of that. It's all interrelated. You talk about cost of insurance too. And if we knew that we had the utilities that were working with the federal and state government to really nail wildfire prevention and mitigation, or mitigation to utility sparked fires, as we saw in Altadena and the Palisades, that would in turn bring down utility costs. and would in turn bring down insurance costs. So anyway, it's all part of a whole, as you know.
I was at SDG&E during the fires of 2003 and 2007, and those were devastating to the community. They were also devastating to SDG&E, and that is what fueled, if I could use the word fueled, the investment into fire mitigation. The insurance company didn't want to pay the whole thing. The CPUC didn't want to give any relief to SDG&E. The other utilities didn't want to help with the case that SDG&E was having, so they really had to do it on their own and invent an entire strategy to continue to get insurance and to get reasonably priced insurance. And I do think they've done a remarkable job in doing that.
I agree. And necessity is the mother of invention. And, the other utilities are, I think, going to learn the hard way. If they don't make those investments proactively, they're going to be forced to reactively.
What else is in the bill that you think will help rates?
So I think we hit the major points: the tax credits, the data center piece, incentivizing utility companies to save consumers money. There's a lot in there about weatherization, about expanding those sorts of programs, the LIHEAP program as well. If you take the Trump energy policy in a nutshell, it is largely a repudiation of that. And that makes it hard to get Republican co-sponsors, but we're not going to give up. My hope is that we'll be prepared and opportunistic for when the time arises to advance some of this. If we have the opportunity next Congress, of course, that will be a big deal for us to try to get the entire package across. But I'm looking at pieces of the package that I think should earn bipartisan support today and seeing what we can do to advance those. For example, on the data center piece, the notion that you should codify not having the average ratepayer or small business owner or consumer foot the cost of the data center and do so in a way that makes everyone a little bit uncomfortable, pleases no one entirely. We got to do that. We got to get that as the law of the land sooner rather than later. So I hope that there are some Republicans that would agree and join us on it.
I would imagine there would be. How can you argue that one, right?
Oh, I'm sure they'd find some argument. You can't set the right percentage, or, the data center folks push back and all. But all the conversations I've had with those big tech companies, with those data center folks, is they want to be helpful in terms of finding a clear path forward so they can better predict their expenses as well. And of course, consumers, that's an easy sell for consumers. But I suspect that this is very important and popular, maybe even more in the red states than the blue, because of where these data centers are proliferating.
What I heard during this meeting yesterday was that even when utilities are taking the steps to keep other customers from paying those bills, those customers don't see it. They don't necessarily understand how it works. And so just by the fact that it's a topic of conversation and becomes a law, that will go a long way just to help people understand that that's not happening, even if it wouldn't have happened anyway in some areas.
I think there's something to that, Lee. And, my experience in Congress trying to get stuff done is that it doesn't happen always the way you think it's going to, but you have to be prepared and opportunistic. And so that's what this bill aims to do. It aims to help us coalesce around some ideas, not to just be reflexively negative on the current policies, but to make sure we're clearly articulating policies of our own. And as a person who's been involved in climate for my entire professional career just about, and who desperately wants to make sure people understand the science and all the rest, and somebody who has been focused on messaging around climate for my entire career in Congress, I am wide open to other means by which we achieve similar ends of advancing the clean energy technologies of the future, accelerating our path to a more sustainable future. And if it means that we are using an opportunity of high bills and affordability being a crisis, literally an emergency for many people not being able to make ends meet, choosing whether they're going to pay their electric bill or their rent or their grocery bill or their healthcare bills. This is the mess that we're in, Lee. And this administration, between the tariffs and the war, is making it immeasurably worse. Obviously, it's an awful situation. From an energy perspective, it is a moment where we can reinforce, I think, with many people, the fallacy that just drill, baby, drill is going to reduce your costs. Because oil being a global commodity subject to global commodity prices, we're not importing from the Strait of Hormuz, but we're subject to what the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz does to global oil prices, because it affects us here in the U.S., even if we're using domestically produced fossil fuels. So I hope that that is beginning to connect in the average person's mind, that all of this is part of of an integrated whole. The health of our planet, the cleanliness of our environment, and the costs we pay for electricity, they're all related.
Norway is looking at this crisis. It's really a worldwide crisis. And they're saying, well, we're producing our energy by wind and we have almost all electric vehicles and they're not seeing this crisis. And I think a lot of other countries, certainly in Europe, and a lot of my neighbors are saying, wow, wish I had solar right now. And now I think there's a reason to get an electric vehicle. So maybe people will realize, even after this crisis passes, that it can happen again anytime.
Well, I'll tell you, we have solar and we have an EV. I have one of the original plug-in hybrids, Chevy Volt. I'm waiting for my son to turn 16 and we're going to hand it down to him and I'll get another EV. But I bring up that car because I do take it in for gas, and gas was $6.
Ugh.
And when I was filling it up, I was looking around and I saw these big old trucks and Escalades and Tahoes and F-150s and all the rest. I thought, man, oh man, every single one of these people are paying $100. And I remember when Biden was president, they would slap the stickers on the gas pump saying, I did that, with a photo of Biden. What do they say now? Do they hold Trump equally accountable? And I saw one candidate running for U.S. Senate said, well, it just means you're going to have a few less lattes at Starbucks. You have to pay your fuel prices. I assume she didn't run that by anybody at Starbucks before she said that.
There were a lot of factors that went into the cost of gasoline at the pump while Biden was president. But there is no way you can argue that anybody other than Donald Trump is responsible for the increases right now.
Yeah, I think it's gone up about $1 since the war. Obviously, in California, there's a lot to unpack that goes into our gas prices. The limited number of refineries and a couple more that have closed, cap and trade program, the state taxes involved. Look, that's a fair and reasonable discussion to unpack those gas prices, but there's another huge element, which is the global oil price. I have always said, you want to get away from the volatility from a transportation cost perspective. There are a lot of reasons that we should diversify and get away from fossil fuels. That's been my mantra for many, many years and will continue to be. Being a representative in California rather than in Texas or in some other places, I can keep talking about it. But you even talk about the administration allowing drilling off the California coast, allowing the Sable Energy to drill in Santa Barbara using the same infrastructure. The last time it was used, they had a pipeline burst that led to all sorts of trouble. And here they are doing it again without the consent of the Congress or the desire of the state of California. And they're doing it in a manner that won't even help most Californians. It's going to help those oil companies in Texas.
I used to think climate change was the number one thing that I could focus on. And now I think it's kind of fallen to number 3 because you have data centers and AI. And AI is a world-changing thing. I think it's going to affect how many people can get jobs and who can get jobs. And then now we have the war, which is number 1. They all actually touch on energy, which is very interesting. What are your thoughts about those 3?
They're all interrelated. And the ability for us to address our climate challenge in the coming decades, there is no question that there is an opportunity for AI to play a significant role in potentially helping us to chart a better path forward as it continues to advance, modeling the right policies that will actually have the greatest probable greenhouse gas reduction. There's great potential there for AI to help play a role in academic modeling and analysis. That being said, it also consumes an enormous amount of power. I don't completely buy the argument that the pros always outweigh the cons. I think we have to be very careful about the guardrails that we put. I think there's enormous good that could come from AI, but also the potential for great problems if we don't put up the right guardrails. As it pertains to data centers, that you just need the data centers to enable the AI revolution to take off. But at the end of the day, I think if we focus in the near term, particularly for the next couple hundred days between now and November, on the cost of electricity, and we explain in clear and persuasive and understandable terms that you don't need to be an energy expert to understand. Just look at your bill. You want that bill to go down. We shouldn't be kneecapping the most affordable source of electricity, which happens to also be the cleanest.
Mike, thank you so much. I agree with all the points you made. I really appreciate you being on the show. I know you're super busy, so I will let you go. Is there anything else you want to say in closing?
No. Thank you, Lee. It's always good to be with you. Always happy to do it, and keep fighting.
Thank you. You too. Your fight really counts.